everyone, welcome back to Future Fiber. This is your host Jenny, and today I thought maybe I'll do a knit and chat. Share my unsolicited opinions about things yet again. Before we get into it, I should talk about what I'm wearing, since I always seem to forget that, and what I'm going to be knitting on today. I've definitely worn this in a different knit and chat before. But this is the Sunday cardigan by Petite Knit, and I knitted up with knit picks, Wonderfluff, and a strand of Knitting for Olive kid silk mohair held together, and I'll put the color names down below. I knit this quite a bit ago, and I feel like it's a nice color, nice poppy color, without it looking like it could potentially go out of trend like some other colors that I've chosen in the past. So yeah, and it's really oversized, so it's nice and cozy to wear. So what I'm going to be knitting on as I'm talking to you today is our all-time favorite Beyond Basic sweatshirt. I'm working on the sleeves right now, so maybe I'll get some progress on this while we talk today. For this knit and chat, I kind of wanted to talk about something that I've been asking as part of the list of questions that I ask during the I Like Your Sweater series that I've done with a couple people now. And that is, what made you start knitting and what keeps you knitting. I think I'm going to focus a little bit more on the what keeps you knitting, because what made you start knitting I've already answered in a Q&A before. And I don't think it's as exciting or interesting as what my answer for what keeps me knitting. I think what kind of gets you into a hobby doesn't necessarily have to be like this big grandiose thing, you know, like just one day you wake up and you decide, well, maybe I should start knitting. I was like this, I've always been a serial kind of like hobby jumper. I've always had like craft-based hobbies that I would kind of dabble in and then abandon and things like that. So it wasn't very unusual that I started knitting. Like I started the same way with like sewing. I've done like, what else have I done? I like tried to do resin crafts at some point. So it wasn't super unusual to me that due to something that I saw on the internet or whatever, I started to take up knitting. But it is a little bit surprising that I've stuck to it for this long. Well, surprising to me, because I get tired of things pretty fast. I wouldn't call this necessarily a good or bad trait. It's just how I am. But with knitting, I've stuck to it for a decent amount of time, you know, like I've stuck to it for like at this point like 3 years or so. And I think it has probably something to do with how easy it is to just like do this while I'm doing other things. Like right now I'm talking to you and knitting at the same time. And it kind of helps me with focus. I used to do this in school as well, where I would doodle while I was listening to like lectures or something, and some teachers didn't really love that, you know, they thought I was slacking off, but I don't necessarily think doing something like this that's like mindless kind of affects how I personally take in information. So, but anyways, I think also maybe I'm going a little bit too deep into this, reading a little bit too much into this, assigning meaning that doesn't really need to exist for something like a simple hobby. And I don't think everybody needs to have some sort of like deep reason why they continue to knit or like discontinue to knit. I think that's just up to the individual. But I am a person of reflection. I'm a person of rumination. I've been kind of thinking about that for a while, like my relationship with craft as a whole versus like art. this is kind of a tangential thing, and maybe like this is definitely TMI, but a girl, she has a BFA. I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree. So I went to art school, which maybe isn't as surprising, since I did talk about my job a little bit before. I am a designer. But I fundamentally think like design and art is a little bit different in its approach and end goal. So ultimately, like, I didn't become what I thought I would be when I first started, you know, exploring and getting into art or whatever. And I've never really like identified very strongly as an artist. Like, it always felt kind of fake to me to refer myself as an artist, even though I did do like, I don't know, traditional things like painting, drawing, all of that. I drew for like most of my life, and that is something that I remember myself doing as my first kind of, I guess it started as a hobby. I must have done it at some point because I liked doing it, and I got enjoyment out of it. But it's kind of like I took that as my only kind of path forward. It's difficult to describe because at this point I don't really do art. I don't make art like I did necessarily. How I define art versus craft to me is like, art has always felt like something that was like an extension of my creative self. And I think the trouble that you run into with putting yourself out there in that kind of like visible and vulnerable way, is that you're ultimately, as unfortunate as it is, art and anything you put out into the world is up for others' interpretation, others, how do I say this? Others' opinions, others' evaluation. And for it to be commercially viable, successful, whatever, you have to, something about what you're putting out into the world has to be kind of positively received by somebody in the world. And yes, of course, there's like millions of people, billions of people actually in the world. So the statistical chance that somebody will like what you put out there is non-zero. However, that also means that there are a non-zero amount of people who will not like what you do. And if you're creating something with the intention of putting some part of yourself into it, what you've put out there is perceived negatively. I think depending on the person, it could feel very, very sad, very like you put a piece of yourself into what you've created, hopefully, with art. And for it to be received negatively, it almost feels like it's a reflection of yourself, like negative response to you, if that makes sense. So I had a really tough time kind of like differentiating that, like any criticism that I would receive on what I put out, like taking that as just, I don't know, somebody's opinion. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion. Somebody's opinion on my work, I took that as like their criticism of me in some way, or like that facet of me that I like put into the work. And I guess I had a pretty tough time like differentiating that. And also because how I approached art was from a very, I say this like it's this like grandiose, like I poured my heart and soul into like what I was drawing, what I was painting, what I was making. No, it was not really that deep. Like at the fundamental level, I am a person who is appreciative of aesthetics. So most of the things that I was making because I thought it looked good or like it was pretty. But then even then, that is a reflection of your taste. So to have that kind of refuted in some ways, it felt like a ding on my personal artistic style or personal artistic vision. And it's just like I was just like a very immature kind of like somebody who was like not very good at taking criticism. And I with the years that I have since that, like maybe that is just how I was. With all that being said, I thought I was going to be doing some sort of creative art, whatever, as like my career or something that I do for the rest of my life in some capacity. And that's kind of why I went to school for it. I didn't specifically major in like fine art or anything, but still it was a more like artistic personal vision field than what I do currently, which I think with design, I initially went the route of graphic design, motion graphics when I first got my first job out of school, I guess. And the fact that like with design, I think it's difficult sometimes for people practicing design to understand that like art, I feel like you can make art without, there is ultimately, for it to be commercially viable, you do need to appeal to a certain sensibility of the masses. But I don't think it's as tied to that as design is. And I was still approaching design in the lens of art, where when I got criticism back on what I had created for work, a lot of the times it felt like it was a reflection of my ability as like a designer or just my personal taste. And I don't think I should have really taken it like that. Now that I am on the other side of giving criticism, sometimes, when I'm working, like I know that design is supposed to be like a means to a goal. Like it's the same with like UX design, user experience design, and graphic design and whatever. You're trying to, like graphic design, if you're making an advertisement, you are designing something that's supposed to be eye-catching in some way to sell like a product or something. For user experience design, you have to design like an app or a workflow or a website or something that allows, whoever's using it to use it in a intuitive way. Design is a solution to a goal. I know that sounds very I don't know if you've seen those making fun of consultants on TikTok or whatever, but it's like, oh, we design solutions for problems, real problems. Like, yeah, it's kind of a meme, but it's also kind of true. Like, and it's sometimes difficult to bridge that gap as a creative, or if you've accepted being creative as part of your MO, then it becomes kind of difficult to untangle yourself from that. So I think it was kind of a difficult time for me where I like was feeling really like, oh my god, is everything that I've kind of been working up towards, like all the work I put in to like draw, paint, whatever, is all of that just not really worthwhile? Was I just like tricking myself into thinking that I was actually good at what I was doing? Like, was I tricking myself into thinking that I was an artist? This is probably like more of a personal thing and not applicable to most artists, or all artists, I should say. With the advent of the internet, now comparison is not always bad, but I think it's easy to kind of compare yourself to others in the current state of the world, where you have to have some sort of online presence for you to be able to market your services, basically. it's difficult to not compare yourself and your work to other people. And like there is a funny funny thing that I saw that was like, oh, I'm sorry I didn't respond to you in the past couple of days. It's because I was designed to eat berries in a cave, not disseminate this large swaths of information. And I do think that's true in many aspects, especially when it comes to viewing, you know, other people's works. Imitation and comparison of other fine works, like masters' works. Renaissance and beyond, like you see a lot of artists doing mock kind of paintings of existing works to kind of improve their skills technically and stuff. So there is a merit to that. Now you have all this such a large volume of work that you can reference from. However, that also makes you realize that your skill in how you create art is, you kind of allow yourself to rank yourself, I guess, in the world, sort of. There's always somebody who's going to be better than you in some way. And I think if you don't have a very strong artistic vision or like creative self, that can be pretty hard to overcome. Especially if you have been posting your work online for a very long time and you are used to kind of receiving feedback in the terms of like likes, or in the good old Tumblr days, the reblogs or whatever, it can make you kind of lose your artistic vision, I guess, or artistic self. So I'm speaking about this kind of broadly and vaguely because I don't really want to focus too much on like if I was actually a good artist or not. I don't think that's really the point. The point is kind of like through all of that, I became kind of disillusioned with art and creating things for the sake of kind of creating, I suppose. So I actually, for the past couple of years, I haven't really drawn or painted in a way where I am thinking about making some sort of income off of it. Like I used to do illustration work. I haven't really done that. I used to make like illustration based merchandise. I don't really do that anymore either, because I just felt like I didn't have a strong creative enough vision where like if I didn't receive the results I wanted from the art that I put out into the world, then I would still be okay with it, you know? Like example, if I didn't like, if I submitted a proposal for something and if I didn't get the job or whatever for that particular illustration work, I would feel like, oh, maybe I'm like not a good artist. If I didn't get as many likes on something that I posted on Instagram, then I would be like, oh, I'm not actually that great of an artist. Which I'm not saying that's a good way to think. It's just, I'm just saying that's how I was. So I just felt myself not really enjoying the process of it. And this is kind of like crazy to think about because this was just like what I would have been doing for most of my life, like 20 plus years, basically, since I like had a pencil in my hand. So the past couple of years I haven't really drawn or like made work. So I was kind of in like this like creative limbo. And that's kind of where my craft hobbies come in. And I think there's a couple, there's like, you know, like the dictionary definition of craft. And I think nowadays, especially, the line between craft and art become blurred. But for me, how I define my craft is as something that presents, at the end of the day, presents itself as something that's like useful to me. Something that I can use and doesn't exist just purely for the sake of existing as art. Like art, you create for the sake of creating art. But for me, craft is something that I do with a purpose. And that's how I started like sewing and knitting. Like I started because I had a purpose of wanting to have a sweater. I started with the purpose of wanting a shirt, to duplicate a shirt that I had. So it was always meaningful. in a very tangible way. In that way, I could allow myself to be more lenient to myself in what I was producing through craft, because it was for the sake of learning how to do, like, I don't know, a raglan sweater. And even if the end result wasn't like the best sweater in the world, in some weird way I was able to justify in my mind that this is like, oh yeah, this is like not terrible. Like, I could put it on. It's on my body. I'm wearing it. I've missed a couple stitches, but the people around me that I talk about this with, they're able to respond positively and say like, hey, that looks really good. And I'm not putting this out into the world thinking like, oh, is this a reflection of my visual identity, my artistic identity? No, it's I mean, I'm sure there is an element of creative in it, that anything I make is imbued with my aesthetic sensibilities, basically, right? However, I don't hold myself to the same light that I did when I was like doing illustration, or when I was painting or things like that. So it's been kind of a interesting creative journey with knitting and fiber arts, because I am kind of like able to let myself just exist and create in the way that I do create. There's not a lot of brain into it. There is not as much like brain power into it, which has been a interesting shift away from how I created and existed before knitting. With all those things, I feel like I can enjoy my crafts a little bit more purely compared to my art right now. And I'm trying to kind of take the practice and attitude I have about craft back into the art. Because I think it's one thing if I never want to make another piece of art ever again, but I don't necessarily think that's true. Because sometimes I find myself being like, oh, I wish I was painting something, or I wish I was drawing something, but I haven't kind of been doing that as actively in the past couple of years. So I would start painting something and then I would stop. I just don't do it as consistently as I used to. It's a little bit more like whenever the mood strikes, and I don't force myself to create anymore like I used to. Generally, I feel like repeated practice or some sort of cadence is a more reliable way to do anything rather than just doing it when the inspiration strikes. But the stuff that I would make by doing that felt really uninspired. So now that I don't have to rely on my art for survival, for money, or any sort of recognition anymore, I'm doing it purely for myself, and I feel like that makes it a little bit more authentic to me. So in a weird roundabout way, I've kind of found myself back in the art that I create. It's really not that deep, because it's not like I'm painting or drawing anything that's really personal to me, but the motivations of me making it at least feel a little bit more clear and more centered around me, rather than just like doing it for something else and an external reason. So yeah, it's been interesting the past couple of years trying to get that back. When I started this channel, I guess the original name for it, before I named it Future Fiber and decided that I was going to only do really like fiber related crafts, it was called Arts and Crafts. Which it would have been terrible for SEO purposes, you know, like that's never gonna come up in the search results. I would never be the #1 search result. Yeah, I really thought I was going to be doing like more, I don't know, like maybe painting or I was just trying to keep it a little bit more general, but I think making it themed, centered around fiber crafts has helped me kind of scope down the content I create and just make it a little bit easier for me to continuously make videos. This is kind of why I feel like I'm a little bit against monetizing your hobbies. Like you might be watching this and you might be like, Jenny, don't you get AdSense money from making YouTube videos? Isn't that monetizing your hobby? And it's like, yeah, in some way, yeah, okay, yes. But just because I stop doing YouTube for whatever reason, if I decide one day that I'm going to stop doing YouTube, that doesn't mean I'm going to stop knitting, you know? I could still do the things that I do on this channel just like in private. So I feel like it's a little bit different. Like I can't ever foresee myself making knitting solely like my income somehow. That's kind of why I don't really want to start getting into pattern design or yarn dyeing or something like that, because first of all, there's just so many other people that are like actually good at it, and I don't want to put in that effort to become actually like very excellent in those areas. I just feel totally content making my little knits that don't take a lot of brain power and doing that, and then talking to people like you on the internet about what I am knitting. So that's kind of been my general mood, my general stance as of lately around how I approach crafting and why I keep knitting, I guess. I mean, this is probably a little bit like oversharing, but I'm curious on your thoughts. Have you had this similar experience with anything that you've created in the past? I think even if you're not a creative person, maybe the bit about criticism, I feel like it could potentially be a universal experience for people, you know, like criticism is, depending on how it's, you know, presented to you and in what context it is given, it could be kind of difficult to accept. And same with like some form of personal outward expression. Like if you feel like that is being disputed somehow, I don't want to necessarily invalidate that emotion that you feel if you are in that situation where you feel like maybe you're being criticized to your core, I guess, a little bit. But I think separation of your output and yourself could be valuable to some extent. At least it was for me. I mean, that's just how it's been for me. It's sometimes difficult to see yourself separately from the things that you put out, from your productivity. I'm curious to hear about what keeps you guys knitting. Like, do you have a deep reason? Do you have a shallow reason? Do you have no reason? That's okay too. Guess I'm just curious on, you know, how others approach their creative process, what they feel like, or if they even think about this stuff, because I don't know, like you get into these little rumination holes and you're like, wow, maybe maybe I really shouldn't be thinking this deeply about certain topics. So this is how much I have of the sleeve. I don't know if I got very far. I started like here, I think, and I did about that much. That's pretty significant. That's not insignificant. And then maybe I'll finish the sleeve today. Oh, maybe not. Oh god. I hope you guys are having a good day wherever you are, and let me know your thoughts on anything. Hopefully this resonated with some people. If it didn't, I mean, that's fine too. I'll see you guys next week for a more regular, you know, knitting based video. But yeah, this is something that's been on my mind, and curious to hear your thoughts about it. And I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.